Gideon Whitlock leaned in close and told Azariah it was over. He said it the way men say things when they believe them completely, his voice low and certain, the thick hemp rope coiled in his hands, the cold blue-white light of the LED towers flooding the cornfield around them. For men in total, 2 trucks parked dark at the fence line, zip ties on Azariah's wrists, and nowhere in any direction that belonged to anyone who would help him. Gideon said the land deal was going through. Said the federal complaint Azariah had filed was going to be explained away as the last act of a desperate man who could not face what he had lost. Said by morning, people would understand what financial ruin drove a broken man to do. He had the story ready. He had written it in his head weeks ago, and tonight was the night it became official. He held up the rope so Azariah could see exactly what he intended. He said, "This is how it ends." And then Azariah looked at him. Not with fear, not with grief. With something Gideon was not prepared for and would not fully understand until the siren started. He smiled. It was not a brave smile, not a defiant one, not the kind of smile a man makes when he is trying to convince someone he is unafraid. It was the calm, settled, slightly patient smile of a man who already knows exactly how the scene ends and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Gideon stepped closer, the rope between his hands, still talking. Azariah's expression did not change. Behind Gideon, his father Thaddeus Whitlock stood at the edge of the light in his Carhartt jacket, watching. 2 men hired from outside the county stood further back in the dead corn rows. The field was silent except for the low hum of the generator running the tower lights. It was a Thursday night in October on land that had been in one family since 1887, and the people standing in the middle of it with a rope had not owned a single acre of it for a single day of their lives. Azariah kept smiling. Gideon asked him what was funny. Azariah didn't answer. He looked past Gideon's shoulder, past his father, past the dark rows of failed corn, toward the fence post at the northern perimeter of his property, where something small and weatherproof had been mounted 3 weeks ago and had been running without interruption since the moment the trucks cut their headlights on the county road. And then, somewhere out across the dark expanse of the New Mexico desert, the first siren broke through the silence. Not 1, 3, coming from different directions simultaneously. That smile had nothing to do with bravery and everything to do with preparation. But to understand what Azariah had prepared and why 4 generations of history had brought this family to a cornfield on a Thursday night with a rope and a set of LED towers, we have to go back to when the water ran dry. Before we go back to where this story really began, take a moment and tell us in the comments what town or city you are watching from today. And if you believe that every action carries a consequence, hit that subscribe button and join our community before the next case opens. The coal land sat on the outskirts of Red River, New Mexico, where the high desert flattened into bottomland and the soil, if you knew how to work it, would grow things that had no business surviving in that climate. Azariah's great-great-grandfather Samuel had understood this. He had filed his homestead claim in 1887 on 150 acres of that bottomland and put seeds in the ground before the ink was dry, and the land had been producing in some form ever since. Cotton first, then cattle, then corn and alfalfa and small grains as the generations turned. The coal farm was not the largest operation in Guadalupe County, but it was one of the oldest, and in a part of New Mexico where the history of who owned what and how they got it was complicated and often painful. That fact meant something. By the time Azariah inherited it, the farm also sat on top of one of the most significant underground water sources in the region. The Red River aquifer ran beneath the coal property and the Whitlock Ranch to the north, and a water-sharing easement established in 1974 between Azariah's father and the previous owner of the Whitlock land had kept both operations alive through every dry year the desert had sent. The easement was legally recorded, county-filed, and had never been contested. Water rights in the high desert were not something either family treated casually. Then the drought arrived and changed the math. It came on gradually, as droughts do, but by the second year it had the kind of sustained intensity that changes the character of the land permanently if you do not respond carefully. Azariah adjusted. He reduced his planted acreage, tightened his irrigation schedule, and monitored his well levels every morning with the methodical attention of a man who knew exactly what he had and did not intend to lose it. The numbers were lower than anything he had seen in his lifetime, but they were holding. The crops were stressed but producing. He had reason to believe he could bring the farm through. Then his wells dropped overnight. Not gradually. One Tuesday morning the gauge reading was so far below where it had been the evening before that he checked it 3 times before he accepted what he was seeing. He pulled the manual measure himself, stood in the early morning silence listening to it drop, and understood immediately that what had happened underground was not seasonal and was not natural. He hired a hydrogeologist out of Albuquerque named Dr. Rains, who spent 3 days taking readings before she told him what she had found. The aquifer had not simply dropped. Its primary flow channel had been mechanically rerouted. Someone had used industrial boring equipment to install a directional pipe system below the natural water table, diverting the main feed away from the coal property. The equipment required to do this was expensive. The permits for it would have been flagged under state water law, and the only property positioned to benefit from this particular rerouting was the Whitlock ranch to the north. Dr. Rains gave him her written report and told him to call a lawyer. Azariah drove home and put the report in his fireproof lockbox and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He was not surprised. He had watched Thaddeus Whitlock for 11 years and knew how the man operated. What he was doing was calculating what came next, because this was not the kind of problem you solved by being right. You had to be right in the right order, through the right channels, with the right documentation, in a county where the Whitlocks had spent a decade cultivating relationships with the sheriff's office, the water board, and the county assessor. Being right without being strategic was just another way of losing. His wife Naomi found the report before he could tell her about it himself. She had been watching the Whitlock property for weeks. She had noticed the machinery. She knew the timeline. And when she finished reading Dr. Rains's report at the kitchen table, she drove to the Whitlock ranch the next morning and stood at the front gate and told Gideon Whitlock that she had documentation of the illegal pipe system, that she was giving him 48 hours to restore the water flow voluntarily before she filed with the state engineer's office and the Bureau of Land Management, and that she strongly recommended he take those 48 hours seriously. Gideon called the county sheriff before Naomi was back in her truck. The deputy who responded was on an informal retainer with the Whitlock family that had been running for the better part of a decade. Gideon had constructed enough of a story in the 20 minutes between Naomi leaving and the deputy arriving to give the man the cover he needed. Naomi was arrested on charges of criminal trespass and making terroristic threats, charges so obviously manufactured that the county district attorney declined to pursue them past the initial filing. But the arrest happened. The story circulated through Red River that the coal woman had come unhinged under the pressure of the drought and threatened the Whitlock family. In a town where the Whitlocks had funded the new community center, sponsored the Little League, and donated the volunteer fire department's equipment, that story did not need any help to travel. Naomi spent one night in the Guadalupe County Jail. Azariah drove there at 5 in the morning with a bondsman and waited 2 hours in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights while paperwork moved at the pace paperwork always moves in a county where the right people had been called the night before. He brought her home without speaking because they had been married for 19 years and understood each other well enough to know that some things needed silence before they could be named. The story that traveled through Red River in the days that followed was the version the Whitlocks had designed. Naomi Cole had trespassed on private land. She had made threats against the family. She had been erratic, unstable, driven to the edge by the failing farm and the mounting debt that everyone in town already knew about, because everyone in town always knew about those things. The Whitlocks were well regarded in Red River. They had funded the renovation of the community center 3 years ago. Thaddeus had personally covered the cost of new equipment for the volunteer fire department after the old pumper failed during a grass fire that came within a quarter mile of the elementary school. Gideon had coached youth baseball for 2 seasons before his schedule made it difficult. They were the kind of family that a small town accumulates loyalty for without quite knowing how it happened, and that loyalty, when the time came, functioned exactly as Thaddeus had always intended it to. People Azariah had known his entire life stopped meeting his eyes at the feed store. A woman his mother had been close to for 30 years crossed the street rather than walk past him outside the post office. At the diner on Clayton, where Azariah had eaten breakfast on Saturdays since he was a child, The service became slow in a way that had not been slow before. None of it was said directly. It never was. It did not need to be. The message arrived through 100 small adjustments in how a community treats someone it has decided to let go. His daughter Iris, 17 and sharp enough to understand exactly what was happening, asked him one evening why they did not just leave. He told her the same thing his father had told him when the hard years came, and leaving would have been easier than staying. He said that leaving was one of the things the land could not survive. That if you left, the leaving became permanent in a way that no court or deed or legal judgment could fully reverse. That some things could only be protected by the people who refused to go. Iris went back to her homework. She did not ask again. 3 days after Naomi's release, a man Azariah did not recognize appeared at the farm's front gate with a manila envelope and the slightly apologetic expression of someone doing a job they have been paid not to have feelings about. Inside the envelope was a written purchase offer for the coal property. The price was 11 cents on the dollar. The offer described the land as economically unviable due to water access challenges, a phrase so precisely calibrated to the exact nature of what the Whitlocks had done to make it unviable that it crossed the line from euphemism into confession. Azariah read it twice. He put it back in the envelope. He handed the envelope to the man and told him to take it back where it came from. He drove to Albuquerque the next morning and met with an environmental attorney named Patricia Osei. She read the hydrogeological report, the purchase offer, and the arrest record in sequence and looked at him with the specific expression of a lawyer who has just watched a case clarify itself completely. She told him he had grounds for a federal complaint with the Bureau of Land Management, a civil suit for tortious interference with water rights, and potentially a criminal referral for the aquifer alteration. She told him the case was strong, but it would take time, and in the meantime, he should assume the Whitlocks understood their own exposure and would not wait patiently for the law to arrive. That last part was the part Azariah had already been thinking about for days. He thanked her, paid her retainer, and filed the federal complaint with the Bureau of Land Management from his kitchen table that same evening. Then he sat in his kitchen for another hour and thought carefully about what Patricia had said. The Whitlocks had already framed his wife for a crime she did not commit. They had used a corrupted local sheriff, a fabricated story, and 30 years of community goodwill to do it, and it had worked. If they were willing to do that, they were willing to do more. And if Azariah was right about what they were willing to do, he needed to be ready for it before it happened rather than after. Over the next 10 days, he installed 4 cellular trail cameras at the perimeter of his property. Small, weather-resistant, the kind used by deer hunters, capable of streaming live video to a remote server over cellular signal. He registered the server with Patricia's office as evidence storage on an active federal case. He drove to Albuquerque again and sat in Patricia's office and gave her the server login, the lockbox combination, the location of the hidden key, and a list of exactly what was inside the box and why each piece mattered. He established what he called the midnight protocol. If Patricia did not receive a check-in call or message from him by midnight on any given night, she was to contact the New Mexico State Police and the Bureau of Land Management field office simultaneously, without waiting for further instruction. Patricia asked him if he was afraid. He told her no. She asked him if he should be. He thought about it for a moment and said probably yes, but that fear and preparation were different things, and he had chosen preparation. She told him that was the right answer. They shook hands, and he drove the 2 hours back to Red River through the dark New Mexico desert and walked his field when he got home the way he always did. He was not going to stop walking his field. That was not something the Whitlocks were going to take from him regardless of what else happened. Gideon Whitlock had been watching the coal property through trail cameras of his own, mounted on fence posts along the shared boundary. When he learned through his contact at the county assessor's office that a federal inquiry had been opened regarding the aquifer, he understood that the window for resolving this quietly had closed. He went to his father. Thaddeus told him that the pipe system would be discovered once the Bureau of Land Management sent investigators, and that the $62 million buyout he had been negotiating with a Phoenix-based water rights investment consortium would collapse the moment the illegal rerouting became part of a federal record. He told his son the coal problem needed to disappear before that happened. He did not specify what he meant. He did not need to. Gideon organized it in 3 days. two men brought in from outside the county. The LED tower equipment staged through a shell company registered in Nevada. Naomi and their daughter Iris were in Albuquerque that Thursday for a college application meeting at the University of New Mexico. He had checked. That was the night they walked into Azariah's cornfield. You saw where that walk ended. Now you know everything that brought them to it. Gideon leaned in close and told Azariah it was over, the rope still in his hands, ready for what came next. And Azariah looked at him with the calm of a man who already knew exactly how the scene ended. He let Gideon finish talking. He let Thaddeus stand in his Carhartt jacket at the edge of the light and believe, one final time, that the story he had written in his head was the story that was going to play out. He waited until the moment when their certainty was at its highest and their attention was fixed on the rope and what they intended to do with it. Then he told them about the camera. The trail camera mounted to the fence post 20 feet to Gideon's left had been transmitting live video to a federal evidence server for the past 47 minutes. Patricia Osei was watching from Albuquerque in real time. The midnight protocol had been triggered an hour ago, and she had not waited for midnight. Every word Thaddeus had spoken, every instruction Gideon had given, everything that had happened in that field since the trucks cut their headlights on the county road, was already logged, time-stamped, and stored on a server registered as evidence storage in an active federal case. Azariah told Gideon that the rope in his hands was now the single most useful piece of evidence the Bureau of Land Management would ever receive in a water theft prosecution. Then the siren started. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. Then, across the dark expanse of the New Mexico desert, the first wail of sirens broke through the quiet. Not from one direction. From 3. Thaddeus moved first. He went for his truck and made it to the county road before a state police cruiser had already positioned across it, lights cutting through the dark. Gideon went north through the corn and came out of the field into the arms of 2 troopers who had come in from the east without lights. The 2 hired men were on the ground before anyone spoke to them. Sheriff Dale Pruitt, reached by state investigators within the hour, resigned before they finished reading him the first charge. His cooperation agreement was signed before sunrise. The federal indictment of Thaddeus and Gideon Whitlock carried 11 counts, including illegal aquifer alteration, criminal conspiracy, witness intimidation, and attempted murder. The Phoenix Water Consortium withdrew from negotiations with the Whitlock Ranch the morning the indictment became public record. The $62 million deal became a line in a case file. The remediation order came 6 weeks later. Bureau of Land Management engineers arrived at the Whitlock property with equipment and paperwork, located the illegal pipe system, and began the process of dismantling it. The water took time to move. It always does underground. But on a Tuesday morning in early December, Azariah was standing at his well when the gauge began to rise. He watched it climb for a long time without moving. The charges against Naomi were vacated. The arrest was expunged from the record. The civil judgment that followed funded, in part, a water rights legal defense organization for small farmers across the Rio Grande Valley. Naomi named it after her husband's great-great-grandfather. The Samuel Cole Fund for Rural Water Rights opened its doors the following spring. The Cole farm is still standing. The corn came back the following growing season, late but full, the way things come back when the ground gets what it was always supposed to have. Iris enrolled at the University of New Mexico that fall on a full scholarship. She is studying environmental law. She told her father the day she got her acceptance letter that she planned to specialize in water rights. He told her that sounded about right. The land has been in the Cole family since 1887. It will be there long after the names Whitlock and Thaddeus and Gideon have been reduced to case file numbers in a federal archive that no one looks at anymore. That is how it goes when the ground is good and the family holds. If you stayed until the end, thank you. More stories from Breach and Balance are already on your screen. Click one now. And if you have not subscribed yet, do not miss what is coming next. See you there.